You're listening to Real Facts on Real Estate with Sean Patrick Maloney.
That sounds good.
Welcome to episode 16, Mold for Real Estate Agents. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Maloney. I'm here with Al Hall of Bay State Mold Advisors.
Good morning.
Good morning, Al. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Al. Tell us a little bit about your company, your certifications, and what it is you actually do.
Our company got our first certification in mold inspection back in 2008 from NORMI. That's the National Organization of Remediators and Mold Inspectors. We then acquired additional certifications in remediation and mold assessment. So we focus on identifying mold problems in buildings, helping realtors to understand whether there is a nuisance or if there is a problem. We like to design a scope, determine what steps they should take next. It may be as simple as cleaning, sanitizing, or it may be remediation is required.
One of my first questions would be, you said remediation and inspections. Can you tell me what's the difference between a remediation and an inspectant?
An inspector is someone who goes in and looks for signs of mold, microbial contamination. A remediator is the person who goes in and removes the mold, the contaminated building materials, and brings it down to a sanitized level that is safe for rebuild.
Okay, for the state of Massachusetts, when you're meeting with a home inspector, what can they legally say about mold? Like, I sometimes see them put different comments about mold, but it's very vague and outside the box on it. So what's the rules on that?
If you don't have a degree in biology, technically you're not allowed to say it's actually mold. You oftentimes hear terms like a mold-like substance or this looks like mold. A mold assessor has a certification which qualifies him to state that it is mold. A mold inspector may not have an assessor certification, and he should use terms such as, this looks like mold, this is a mold-like substance. We need to test it to verify what type of mold it is.
So often when we go to these home inspections, it's tempting as an agent to get involved in the situation. We see the mold or the mold-like substance that's up there, and immediately, agents, they want to start, holding the deal together. They want to talk about what can be done, or they want to give ideas and everything. What's the best advice you can give for an agent when they're in a situation and you have a mold-like substance there?
Well, because the real estate industry, when you purchase a property, you're inheriting whatever's there. So in the interest of the buyer, we always recommend that if you see a suspect mold problem, you should hire a professional mold inspector to come in and assess the situation, determining whether it is just a nuisance or is more action actually required.
So on a mold assessment or the original investigation, are there costs involved in that? Are they inspections? How does that work as far as that goes?
Yes, there are inspectors who will do free inspections, but they're oftentimes looking for the remediation work, and that can be a little less than beneficial to the homeowner. What you want is a professional inspector who's going to come in and do a thorough inspection. It can go anywhere from $350 to $700 or $800, depending on the level of the inspection that is required. Every inspection should include at least air samples being taken, because even though you may not see a symptom of mold, you could still have an indoor air quality problem of too many air spores in the home.
Okay, so when you do one of those inspections, for the purpose of being an agent, a lot of times we have to write extensions to figure out timelines. What kind of timeline is there between the air samples and getting them back and figuring out where the property stands mold-wise?
Typically, mold samples can be processed as air and tape samples can be processed within 3 days. It takes 2 to 3 days to get to a lab, depending on which lab you use, and it can take 24 hours for the sample to be processed.
So it seems like when you run into a situation here, you might be looking at another week time to just make sure that you have time to figure it out. Obviously, there'll be different time allowed for the mitigation and the future remediation of it, but overall, you're going to need at least 5 days to make sure that you have time for the samples to get out and get back to you and have answers.
Yeah, because you want to give the mold inspector time to interpret the lab samples. He'll have photos he's taken notes, but until the lab reports come back, he may not be able to give you a full understanding and recommendation what needs to go forward next.
So that leads me to my next question. Are there different types of mold inspectors, or is one mold inspector another mold inspector? How does that work?
A professional mold inspector should be a professional mold inspector. He should be registered with the state. He should have his certifications, and they should be verifiable. There are mold inspectors that are not properly trained or certified. You should always make sure that person you're hiring has the credentials to back up the work that he's doing, and that the labs that he uses are accredited labs. Otherwise, if something comes up in court, if it's not accredited, it's not admissible.
So again, we are a Massachusetts-based group here, so we are going over Massachusetts facts. So if anyone's listening outside the state, a lot of these will probably be general rules of thumb, but you want to check in with your local regulations to make sure that these things apply to you. But quite commonly, a lot of these types of things are pretty standard, and with a state like Massachusetts or California, we're usually actually stricter than most other states. As far as who can work on mold, so you've talked about the mold inspectors. We have an issue. We're going to get some sort of certificate or some sort of thing in writing to tell our buyer or seller that the mold has now been remediated. Who can work on that type of work?
Well, in Massachusetts, anyone who has a home improvement contractor's license can do mold remediation. They unfortunately do not have to be certified or properly trained for mold work. They just have to have that certification with that registration with the state. We always recommend you should have someone who is certified. You can verify that certification, because mold is a dangerous substance. You leave it behind, you're endangering people's lives.
Yeah, I can completely agree with that. And I understand what you're saying about free inspections versus paid inspections. I do usually try to get all my buyers to go with a paid inspector, whether it be on a heating system or construction or any of that, because if the person's there and getting paid, they don't mind giving you an honest opinion. But if they're there for the site of future work, it's pretty easy to find work that needs to be done in order to create a job out of the job. As much as you want a thorough job, usually paying somebody leads to the most thorough job on anything. Are all molds bad? I mean, it seems like all the time we are hearing the word mold, and immediately in our industry, it's a full letter word, mold. So people jump and they're like, oh my God, mold. So are they all bad? I mean, it seems like some of them might not be.
Unfortunately, it depends on each individual's personal body. Are they allergic to it? If they are, it's bad. If you're not, it's not. There are a few what's called target molds, and this falls in the category of about 12 different types of mold that you want to have as low a count as possible indoors as possible. Even some, like Stachybotrys, you want a 0 count. So in short, every mold can be an allergen to someone, but it depends on your own sensitivities of just how bad it can be. So it's about quality and quantity.
So can you tell me a little bit about what is a toxic mold?
Well, there are some that are called what we call target molds in our industry, such as Aspergillus and Penicillium. They're more allergenic. More toxic mold would be the most common people hear of is Stachybotrys chaudarium. This is the one that's in the news everybody hears about. This one produces a mycotoxin, or a gas, that is dangerous to the nervous system and the brain. It can also cause infections in the respiratory system, same as Aspergillus and Penicillium and Cladosporium. Those can all cause infections in the respiratory mucus areas. But the biggest thing is, with toxic, it's the mycotoxin or the gas that's produced. And Stachybotrys is the one that is most documented, while many others do have some medical doctorate notations made on them.
So when you're looking at molds, I mean, commonly during the situation where we have a mold-like substance, there might be soft fabric items around. There might be things like blankets or pillowcases or all the different things sitting on the basement floor, and when they move them around, there are some molds involved. Is it safe to clean these items? If so, where do we go with that?
First, let me just state, if you're going to keep anything in the basement, it should be stored in airtight plastic containers, and that way air and spores cannot get at it as readily. However, if you do have clothing materials, blankets, shirts, whatever, that do have that musty smell, there's mold on them. Mostly, you usually just have to wash them. Put them through the laundry. If it's something more sensitive, there is air purifiers that can kill and break down the mycotoxins and the mold spores. They're called active air purifiers. So we can talk about that in depth later.
Well, a lot of times as a real estate agent, we go out on a preliminary visit on a house, and we're out there, and a lot of times you go into a basement and the person has a dehumidifier running. If we were to advise them, what setting would we want that dehumidifier on, and is there an optimal location in the basement to have it?
As a general rule, you would like to set your dehumidifier between 45 and 55. The larger the basement, the lower you want to set it. So most people, I just don't set it at 50, and you usually don't have to worry about it. If it's centrally located and closer to the floor, all the better. In a basement, the air doesn't move as much, so it stratifies. So the coolest, dampest air is near the floor. So if you dehumidify it closer to the floor, you have a better chance of reducing humidity in the basement quicker.
That's interesting. I've actually seen quite a few in the wrong location then, because I know a lot of people that don't want to spend the money on a pump system. One, put it up above the washer holder so that it ends up going down the washer line so they don't have to empty the barrel. They can put it down through that line. So getting it down by the floor is going to pull the most moisture out of the whole situation.
Correct. If you have the dehumidifier set up near the ceiling, yeah, you will have dry air up there. And eventually what's lower will get there, but because the air stratifies, you can actually still have mold growing near the floor, even though your air up in the ceiling is at 50%.
So one of the things that it seems like overall, from what I've been learning about mold, speaking with you over the past few times I've met with you, is it's not about fixing the mold as much as it's about figuring out what caused the mold to originally be there, like where the issue was. Can you elaborate just a little bit on that one?
Sure. Mold is ubiquitous. So these mold spores are around 24/7, 365. The most important thing is to keep humidity down. If the humidity or moisture levels have raised, this is going to cause the mold problem. So determining what is causing the humidity to rise is what you need to fix, whether it's a leak in the foundation, porous concrete, or some other cause.
Okay, that makes sense to me because, yeah, it seems like a lot of times it's, people not putting downspouts on the extensions on the gutters over to maybe having the land graded incorrectly, or just simply having a leaky bulkhead that's constantly allowing water to get down into that little area and then originally starting basically a mold farm there because of the fact that there's moisture constantly present. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is, when you do a mold project, is there such thing as a mold certificate? I know a lot of times when a buyer goes to buy a property, they really kind of want some sort of piece of paper or a certification or warranty or guarantee or something that says that the mold work was done. Can you tell me a little more about how that works? This might be company specific.
Well, it depends on the mold remediation company or the company that's doing the treating. Some will give a certificate of treatment, which means that they treated the mold. It doesn't mean there's a warranty. It just said that they took care of it using proper standards. Then there are other companies that will issue a warranty. Typically in Massachusetts, your warranty is 1 to 5 years. There are companies that can go up to 35 years depending on the process and the materials they use for cleaning and sanitizing and inhibiting growth. They can be certifications, they can be warranties, and they can even be guarantees. It just depends on the company and what networks they have.
Great. So next off, I wanted to ask you a question. We're in the state of Massachusetts where we obviously have to disclose everything. It's quite common for people to be wanting to hide situations. And, we meet with sellers and they don't want to tell us the truth about things. When it comes to getting water, whether it's 6 inches, a foot, at what point should you open up walls and at what point should you deal with potential for growing future mold?
Well, in any finished room, if the water has reached the level of being absorbed into the sheetrock, the wall should be opened. It's more critical for walls that are exterior walls which have insulation. The higher the water, the higher you need to open up the wall and dry it out and get it done within 24 hours or mold can start to grow, typically 24 to 48 hours, depending on the food source and the type of mold that's there. But if it's wet, you need to get it dry. And typically, it's recommended by Normie, open the wall and get it dry.
Excellent. So that makes sense to me. Now, what about when people have a very simple thing like they have a situation where they get a lot of water into a carpet and they really soak the carpet well, whether it be that they left the basement door open and some rain got down there or anything. Is that a situation where we'd be thinking about that, or just a wet dry vac and get it out of there?
If a carpet in the basement or any finished area gets wet, it needs to be dried as quickly as possible. Usually this would require water extractors and air movers. You can oftentimes save the carpet if you get it dry within 24 hours. However, if after 24 hours the carpet is still soaking wet, you are then going to have mold start to develop underneath in the pad, the cushion. That cannot be saved. And once you start ripping up the carpet, you will end up having to get the pad out. You'll end up having to just throw away the carpet because you're going to end up destroying it trying to get it out.
So then, is there a difference between saltwater damage and freshwater damage when it comes to mold?
Not really. The salt will inhibit some growth, but it will not stop it. Salt is depending on the type of salt that are in the waters at that time and other bacteria and other things. Mold's going to grow once water starts to get something wet. The salt may inhibit it, but it won't stop it.
Last question I just want to finish off with. In a world that we're in nowadays where everyone wants to be a flipper, everyone wants to buy houses, tear them open, rip down the walls, put up new ones, and sell them. As a flipper, as a real estate agent or flipper, what kind of risks are you putting yourself at by getting in there and demoing this stuff and just hauling it out and throwing it away? I see a lot of people just decide to get a dumpster and get in there and rip the place apart and do it.
Whenever you're doing any kind of flip, tear out, demolition, and rebuild, you have to think about protecting yourself. That's the first thing. You need to protect your eyes, your lungs, your respiratory system, and your skin. It doesn't matter whether there's mold there or not. There's always going to be some sort of hidden toxin, so you need to protect yourself. Secondary, once it's gutted, you really should do a thorough cleaning, because now you have to think about protecting the people who are going to be buying the property next. And you're also going to be exposing yourself to whatever's left after you've done the tear out. So cleaning it properly is very important.
Well, thanks for joining me here today, Al. Seems like there's a lot to know in the mold subject. If someone was looking to reach out to you and get a hold of you, how would they do so as far as mold remediation and inspections and everything like that?
Well, they can either call us directly at 508-930-7326 or go to our website, basedatemoldadvisors.com. We can also be seen on Instagram and Facebook.
Excellent. Well, it seems like you're a wealth of knowledge on the subject of mold. I'm very happy to have you in today. Thanks for being on the show. Everyone who's on the show today, feel free to email me or message me any questions, and I'd be happy to pass them along to Al. I look forward to talking to you next week. If you have any ideas for future shows, feel free to reach out to me for that as well. Make sure to follow the podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.